Now let's dig a bit into CNDT to understand a little bit more about what is going on, how we are acquiring all of this IP and bringing it into the system. CNDT is mined through two things. One, the use of the IP. Every time the IP is used and royalties are being paid in CNDT, it actually mines more CNDT, which goes back to the party who paid for the use of the IP in the first place. Also, anytime technology is contributed, the value of that technology causes mining of additional CNDT, which also goes back to the party contributing the IP. This creates a virtuous cycle. But in addition to CNDT, these two acts also cause squares with their yield rights to be created. And these squares represent a right to receive future points every month, points which are backed by the value of MDPN, as we will unpack a bit more in a minute. Therefore, you get two rewards when you contribute IP or you pay to use IP to the conduit network IP trusts. One is the conduit you mine. The second is the yield rights that will produce monthly points that come from the squares that you also earn in that process. This creates another virtuous cycle, a cycle that continues to turn around and around using two different rewards to reward the contributors and the users of IP. Now, if we continue looking at this further, and we look at MDPN. MDPN isn't mined, it's created. It's created through a process called asset alchemy. Asset alchemy requires the use of a CNDT and a SWCX token to be combined into an MDPN. In other words, CNDT and SWCX are raw materials that are used to create an MDPN. And when it's created, its value actually disappears. The original CNDT is destroyed, and the original SWCX is destroyed and no longer exists. Once an MDPN is created, you cannot separate it back into its original elements of a CNDT and an SWCX. These then work together in a dynamic system, one of which is mined by anyone when they use or contribute IP, and one of which is mined by trusts who are using it to pay off bonds that are used to buy assets, pay off their debt, and move them from a system of scarcity into the world of abundance. Now, as we move further through the system, what we find is that the MDPN is also the thing that is stored in rewards treasuries that backs points. Therefore, the value of every point is equal to the value of an MDPN token. Now, SWCX, besides being used to be able to mine MDPN or to create MDPN, is actually convertible to a square. It is the only thing that you can use to acquire a square without earning it or being gifted it by somebody else as a result of their death. This means that it represents an option that you can use to create an MDPN, or to create a square or to hold. And when you use it to create a square, you permanently lose it. Now, every square comes with a yield right, and those squares are not transferable or purchasable. You can use your square to generate its yield right and sell that to somebody else, gift it to somebody else, or invest it with somebody else. And the beauty of yield rights is that once a time period has expired that you have set on your yield right, which can be anything from 2 months to 25 years, it returns to its square owner, the original holder. And even if that square has passed on to a descendant, it will then move to the descendant. This creates generational legacy for every family of the value that it creates and breaks the cycle of poverty that can happen as a result of parents who make foolish actions or are caught in calamities such as wars. Now, yield rights can be transferred for up to 25 years, but at the start of the rewards network, we limit this to 7 years or less because we want to prevent people from accidentally allowing someone to get theirs for 25 years because they don't know what it's really worth. And as we will see, it's worth far more than you might imagine. Now, if we move on from this, we can look at what creates all of this value. What makes MDPN valuable? And hence ensures the value of SWCX and CNDT because they can be used to create it. Well, to understand this, we need to understand that when we talk about its value, we are talking about its economic use value. And economic use value is not the same as market value. Market value might be greater due to speculation or less due to pessimism in the market about the future value of something. Use value is what it's worth in terms of what you can get for it. So if I have a token which allows me to ride on a bus, its use value is a bus ride. And if that bus ride is worth $1, then you can argue that its use value is $1. Now, if I have 1,000 riders who want to ride a bus within a current period means a month. If I want to have 1,000 riders ride a bus in a month, and if there are only 1,000 tokens to ride the bus that are in circulation, then the use value is what you can use it for within the current period, within the month. Therefore, 1,000 bus riders riding 1,000 bus rides worth $1 each means that 1,000 bus tokens are divided by the 1,000 riders, which equals $1 per token. Not in market value, but in use value. Again, market value could be greater or less than that number. Now, if we don't have one bus, but we have 2 buses now, and therefore we have 2,000 riders that want to ride on both of our buses, but we still only have 1,000 tokens. What happens is that the value per token has gone up because I have 2,000 riders, 1,000 tokens. Again, I'm not talking about its market value, what the market will pay for it. That will be controlled by market drivers. But its economic value is $2 if a bus ride is worth $1. Now, with a physical token, this would mean one token would be worth 2 rides, which is kind of impractical if I only want to use one ride. But if we look at it in another way, there are many people that would call what's going on here is creating scarcity. And scarcity is the mechanism of creating value. And yet this is the system of scarcity that we want to leave. And there is nothing in this that is scarce. What we're actually dealing with is a supply that's limited, not scarce. If we were dealing with a physical thing like gold or diamonds or something, artificially limiting its supply would cause scarcity. But when we're dealing with a blockchain token, all a blockchain token is a number. And that number can be divided again and again and again and again. I can take a number and have any number of decimal places. So I could divide 1 by 4, and I would have 0.25. And I could divide 0.25 by 4 again, and I'd have 0.0625. I could keep doing this forever. There are an infinite number of possible numbers that are after 1. It never ends. There is nothing scarce about the number of numbers. It's just that the numbers are limited so that the value actually increases in the token over time. Now, what this looks like, if we take a look at this in a graph, this is an example of a DPIN token being used to buy $1,000 of purchases. And how many tokens do you need, calculating its use value? If my use value is going up over time, which is on this side, expressed in thousands of dollars, and if I have a set of tokens that is starting at about 25,000 needed to buy $1,000 worth of purchases a month, over time, the blue line shows how many tokens I need to make that same $1,000 worth of purchases. The blue line falls down and down and down over time until it drops to only a few dozen that are needed to buy 1,000 in purchases. But it started at 25,000 that were needed to buy 1,000 in purchases. That's because its use, the number of things that it can be used for, have increased. What's happening here is that we're showing how if we limit the riders to the bus to only be able to ride the bus if they use the bus token, but we're not talking about just buses, we're talking about every asset class in the world. And we're talking about every business, every service, every product that is sold. If you use the same token, which is MDPN, to purchase those, you get these dynamics. This is what happens with Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is only used to basically make payments. That's its only economic use value. Yet it's created over $2 trillion of market cap value that has been owned by investors and miners and people who were speculators in the Bitcoin market. The difference in this system is that all of this value is going into assets, real world assets, things like ports and airlines, ships, oil wells, solar fields, roads, bridges, things that everybody needs to live and businesses need to operate. All of this is generating demand, and this demand is increasing its value. Now, if we do one additional thing, we get a really amazing thing to occur. If we set aside half of the tokens to cover the cost of maintenance on our buses, which are just analogies for all of the assets that we have moved out of the system of scarcity into the world of abundance. If we set those aside for future maintenance and replacement value, because those buses eventually need to be replaced, then what we get is this same thing that happens as a business sets aside capital to replace its assets, or it depreciates the value of the assets that it bought so that it basically has less and less value on its balance sheet for that asset, which it then uses debt in the future to replace. By setting these aside and having that ratio be about half of the tokens in supply, what happens is we reduce the supply in the market so that it's half. Now, this is not some artificial lockup of tokens. This is actually storing the tokens for the economic value of replacing the assets and maintaining them, which has real economic value, not artificial economic value. This then causes the value to increase again, because we're now having our 2,000 riders looking at just 500 tokens that are available. This is what drives the economic engine that increases the value of MDPN. Now, what's happening, if we continue this dive into understanding what's occurring, what's happening here is that every time we double the assets, if we set aside half of the token supply to replace and maintain those assets, and we increase the demand for the token in economic use, is that its value goes to 4 times its prior value. So from $1 to 4, from $4 to 16, every time we double the assets. If we simply wait to pay our bonds off that we used to buy the bus in the first place until we have acquired enough buses to get a 16 times improvement in value, we can take 1/16 of the value of all the tokens and sell them to pay the bond off. What this means is that we can roll this forward infinitely, year after year after year, doubling the number of assets over and over and over again, buying more and more assets and moving them from the system of a scarcity into the world of abundance. And as we do, we create more and more value, each time increasing the economic value of those assets. Now, to look at this another way, we need to understand how sweet coin, or SWCX, is mined. This is the third of the economic engines that are used to create lift, as the suspension bridge uses the cables and its pillars to create lift to hold the bridge above water. These tokens are mined exclusively by trusts, and they mine them from the profits that are generated from the assets that have been moved into those trusts for your benefit, for my benefit, for the benefit of all the buyers and the sellers in the world of abundance. All of these trusts take their profits and buy crop. Crop is a cost reduction on a future purchase. It's a discount in the future that's paid for today. This is how all rewards networks typically work. When you fly on an airline, you basically might earn points. And if you're earning those points, what's happening is the airline is taking some money from today and putting it on the balance sheet of the rewards program for it to be given to you as a point that when you redeem will get cashed in and returned to the airline. This is what crop is, and all crop has to be purchased using MDPN. And so this is happening, and all of these profits are going into a pool. Now, buyers and sellers also voluntarily can choose to contribute crop in their transactions. The amount that they contribute is also added to the pool. And let's say that pool got 80 MDPN tokens. All those tokens become points, which are then transferred to all of the square owners who have active squares. The square owners are the buyers and the sellers who created this value by being the customers and the workers who created all the value in the first place. We might think that Apple is worth a lot of money because of its technology. But in reality, Apple's worth the money it's worth because it has a lot of customers. If it had no customers, it wouldn't matter what technology it had. It wouldn't have very much value. Now, this is then used to contribute to something that's called a treasury, a rewards treasury, which is itself a DAO, a distributed autonomous organization, an organization run by technology, not AI. It's not run by AI, it's run by algorithms. Those algorithms are math, and that math can prove what it will do. So we can depend on the actions that it will take because we can prove that the math will do certain things. This 80 tokens, MDPN tokens, that have been contributed into the crop pool by buyers and sellers and by profits, all go onto the balance sheet of these rewards treasuries, which are operated by DAOs. At the end of each month, the MDPN tokens are transferred from the balance sheet as just being an asset to getting a liability, which is its points that it issues to each user. What's happening is sellers and buyers, assets, all generating MDPN that goes into this pool, which backs points that goes to all of the square holders or the people with yield rights. Now, to prevent this from becoming something that somebody can just build up as a big asset and then just sit on a couch and do nothing, make all these points every single month, and not continue to participate in the economy, the economy requires you to continue to spend points within the network, and you have to spend them over time or you get cut off. Because the goal is to create economic abundance. This requires turns in the economy. How this is measured is that the crop is stored in a ledger that keeps receipts for each party from all of the purchases that occurred by them or their counterparty. So if we have a transaction in which the seller contributed 10 MDPN and the buyer contributed 5, neither of them had to contribute anything, by the way. But if they did, the total was 15, and that gets added to each party's crop ledger as a receipt for having purchased 15 MDN worth of points. Those points are given out to other people, and other people provide points that come to each of these parties. This is stored in a points ledger, and the most you can receive in your points ledger before you cannot receive any more points is 120% of the total number of MDPN contributed to by crop by you or your counterparty in trade. What this means is that yield rights or their squares that they come from, if they've been separated from their square, if the yield right has been separated from its square, or squares with yield rights intact, are either active or non-active. Active squares are those that are held by parties that have a lifetime of contribution between them and their counterparty of MDN tokens to buy crop that is greater than the number of points that they have currently received. And as long as that's less than 120%, their yield rights or their squares are considered to be active. Square holders that have yield rights still intact, or people that have squares that have sold their yield rights or transferred or gifted them to somebody else, or people that have yield rights that have received all the points that they're allowed, have non-active squares and yield rights. these parties do not continue to receive points on a monthly basis. This ensures that everybody stays active in the economy that's created by the rewards network, which is a mutualized system designed to benefit both the buyer and the seller equally. What is happening here, MDPN that is received as contributions from profits and from crop contributions by buyers and sellers, backs points that are issued monthly to active square holders and yield right holders. So if we received 80 MDPN tokens, and there will be 80 points issued. Those 80 points will show up as a liability on the balance sheet of the Treasury that's issuing the points. Those will get equally divided between the yield rights and squares with yield rights intact that have active squares and yield rights. So if we had 80 and 80 parties that had yield rights and active squares, or 80 squares and yield rights held by parties, the 80 would be divided by 8, and each square or yield right would get 10 points. Anyone holding squares with their yield rights intact that are non-active, or yield rights that are non-active, or squares that have had their yield right transferred to somebody else, do not receive anything that month. But if they simply continue to participate in the next month, they will continue receiving points. What's happening here is MDPN is engineered to increase in value over time. And when it does, the points that it backs also increase in value over time. And this creates an interesting effect. Both the number of points received per square or yield right increases over time, and the value of those increase as a result of the economic engineering which causes the use value of MDPN to increase. In an example here, we can see that we can receive points which are less than a full point, just a partial point. And we get more points as time goes on. And if the value of MDPN is also increasing as time goes on, what's happening is the total value that we are receiving per month is going up over time. So both the value and the number of points goes up, and we need to ask ourselves a question. If we took the second month that was in our slide before, and we said, well, what's a tree that produces $4 a month worth over a 6-year period of time? Is it worth $4, $8, $16? What's it worth? Well, the market decides what it's worth. But it's worth more than $4. I think we would all agree. And if we recognize that the tree that's producing $4 now, and we look at what happens over time and it goes up in value, what's a tree worth that's producing $4 now and 6 years from now is producing $21.20 per month? That's worth a whole lot more still. This is what creates value in the yield rights. And this is what is being used to create loans which have no interest. There's no magic here. All that's happening is that the increase in the value of the points and the increase in the number of points is being used to reward the party who's putting up money to loan at no interest. Now, the final question that we have is, well, how do I earn these squares? How do I get them? Well, the way we get them is that you earn them by increasing your economic activity. This is measured by measuring the annual monthly dollars of crop that are contributed by you and your counterparties in trade. When you use businesses and assets that have been acquired by the trusts or any business that voluntarily wants to participate in the rewards network, and any party who wants to participate as a customer in the rewards network. Your wallet automatically measures the amount of increase and whether there's any increase at all by measuring whether or not your average has increased this month. If your average goes up in any month, you have an increase. And that increase produces new squares that you own. So as you increase your economic activity, you increase the number of squares and the yield rights that come with those squares that you receive. In our example here, there are 3 months in which an increase occurred and 3 months in which no increase occurred. The purple months are months in which increases occurred and a new threshold was achieved. In each of those months, an increase over the prior threshold caused a reward of additional yield rights and their squares. Now, if we add this up, what happened is that we've ended up earning a total of 9 squares over this 6-month period of time. Now, squares are earned by growing growth. They can also be converted as a result of taking an SWCX token and converting it to a square, which destroys the SWCX token. It can no longer be unconverted. Once converted, it can't be undone. You also receive squares by simply signing up. You receive squares by recruiting other people to sign up for the network, by telling them the good news of what it's like to move from a system of scarcity to a world of abundance. You inherit them when somebody who has you as a dependent or as a beneficiary passes away, so that your squares go to your children or to the other people that you want to bless upon your death. And companies are not allowed to own squares for more than a year, and they must then pass those squares to their workers, their suppliers, their customers, or their investors, to people, live, breathing people. Those are the ways that you can earn squares, and this is what causes us to move from a world of scarcity into a world where the assets are owned by customers and the workers who create the actual supply and demand in our economies. All of this occurs without you having to know how this works, because all of this occurs through simple applications that exist on these devices. Just like the bridges that we cross daily, we don't need to know about the engineering of the bridge to go across the bridge. We don't need to know the details of how our personal devices actually function in order to use them. We simply use them. The only people that need to know about these details, who need to understand how all this works, are the people that use these systems, the people that test these systems, the people that build these systems for your benefit. The people that are the builders of the bridge. Welcome to the bridge of the future, the bridge that takes us from a system of scarcity into a world of abundance, where poverty is reduced and systemic poverty is limited, where we have generational value that is created and where no one is left behind, where those who produce and those who consume are both rewarded for being active participants in the economy they create, not with higher income, but with lower cost, because it is always better to get a lower cost than a higher income. Your currency can crash, Everything you have in your nation can be lost through war. You could have a change in political regime that would completely destroy all the value you have. But in the world of abundance, all that value is held all over the world in the same structure as used by the wealthiest families on earth to benefit their children and help them protect their assets and their future. Technology is now allowing us to make this something that can be delivered to every person on earth, from subsistence farmers to the wealthiest people on Wall Street in London or Singapore. All of this will benefit everyone, and nobody gets hurt. This is a mutualized environment, a mutualized society that leads to a digital society that's virtual, that operates everywhere, and that is secured through math. Math that you can trust, instead of having to trust people you don't know. This doesn't replace trust. It just extends who you can trust. It doesn't take bad people and turn them into good people. It just makes sure the bad people don't hurt good people. This is a sweet bridge to the future.